Let me read the House rules. Thank you for joining us this evening for the February 24th, 2022 Monte Sereno Joint City Council and Site and Architectural Commission meeting. Before the meeting is called to order, I would like to point out a few House rules to assist council members, commissioners, staff, and members of the public to successfully participate in this meeting. Council members, your microphone is live, so please keep your microphones on mute until you wish to speak. That goes for the commissioners as well. For tonight's meeting, we are using Zoom to host the City Council and Site and Architectural joint meeting. At the bottom of the Zoom client, there are two icons, chat and raise hand. Please use chat only to report technical issues such as being unable to hear a council member speaking. Please use raise hand to be recognized by the mayor and enabled to speak to the council and or commission. To comment under oral communication or on any agenda item, you're allowed 3 minutes to speak per agenda item. Emails limited to 350 words can also be submitted to the city clerk and it will be read into the record. This word limit is set to adhere to the typical 3-minute time allowance. Only attendees using the Zoom application can use the raise hand option to comment. Participants calling in from the telephone will only be able to listen and cannot provide feedback or public comment. Lastly, because we are not all in the same room, all votes at this meeting will be taken by roll call. And I will start with the roll call. Councilmember Turner.
Here.
Councilmember Lawler.
Present.
Councilmember Luthold.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Nekacek.
Present.
Mayor Elahi.
Present.
Sorry, let me get the commissioners. Give me 1 second. I apologize. Commissioner Zeidler.
Here.
Commissioner Sharma.
Here.
Commissioner Booker.
Here.
Commissioner White.
Here.
And Commissioner Balasubramanian. I apologize for the mispronunciation. And I do not see him present. We have a quorum.
Okay. Thank you. So the first business is introduction to the housing element process. I guess that's the only business we have today. And we have a staff report, I assume.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, council members and commissioners. I'm Diana Perkins, the city planner. And tonight's meeting is to provide an introduction to our housing element update, including a description of the major components of the housing element, as well as a timeline for this project over the course of this year. This will be the first in a series of public meetings and community meetings that we will be holding throughout the project. With us tonight are Andy Flower and Lauren Hoare from EMC Planning Group, and they are our consultants helping us with this project. I know they have quite a bit of information to present tonight, so I will turn the presentation over to them.
Thank you, Diana. My name is Lauren Herr, and I'm here with EMC Group and Andy Flower as well. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. So thank you all for being here today. As Diana said, we're here to discuss our progress with the housing element and our path forward. So the purpose of today's meeting is to develop a mutual understanding of the importance of this 6-cycle housing element, as well as talk about the overall project timeline and some key milestones. We'll also dive into the exciting tools we're using for public engagement, and we look forward to hearing feedback from the council and commissioners, as well as the public. So the agenda will provide a brief overview of the housing element process, why this sixth cycle has a unique emphasis on equity, and as well as the regional housing needs allocation, what that means and how it relates to the housing element. Some of the council and commissioners may be quite familiar with these first three, but we want to make sure that the public and everybody is on the same page. So that will be a brief overview. Then we'll go to the timeline, as well as some ideas, initial ideas for potential sites and programs. And then looking at the public engagement and a question and answer session. So what is the sixth cycle housing element update? It is a comprehensive policy document that is part of the general plan and is required by state law to be updated every 8 years. And overall, the housing element is outlining a plan to accommodate existing and projected future housing needs for people in the Monte Sereno communities across different income groups. And one point of clarification is that the city of Monte Sereno isn't responsible for actually building the housing. That's still part of the, private market, but the housing element, a key part of the housing element policy document will be outlining how Monte Sereno is going to plan and remove barriers so that new housing can successfully be added to Monte Sereno. So some of the key components of the housing element document is a data analysis of the housing needs, looking at existing constraints, identifying potential sites, and coming up with a detailed plan that outlines goals, policies, programs, and quantified objectives on how we will accommodate additional housing units in Monte Sereno. And there's a special focus on affirmatively furthering fair housing, as well as public engagement. And I'll talk in more detail about that as well. So in terms of everyone's role in creating this housing element that meets both the needs and desires for the community of Monte Sereno, there are several different groups of people that we want to hear from, and that includes city staff, policymakers, both the state policymakers that will be certifying. Their input is important, as well as you today, the commissioners and the council, and important decision makers. We want to hear from the existing community in Monte Sereno, as well as future residents and neighbors that we would welcome to Monte Sereno. And then lastly, and not lastly, but last but not least, developers are also an important part of this equation, because they are the ones that, along with, neighborhood contractors, will be building these additional housing units, and we want to hear from them as well. So in terms of equity, there is a new piece of legislation, and equity has always been important to the housing element process. This new law is one large portion of what we'll need to focus on throughout the housing element process, as well as in our document. And the overall concept of this legislation, which is known as AB 686, and you'll also hear us refer to it as Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, or the acronym AFFH. And it involves taking meaningful actions in order to overcome patterns of segregation and foster an inclusive community within Monte Sereno, and using those meaningful actions to try and mitigate barriers that have previously restricted access to housing opportunities for certain marginalized groups. The goals of AFFH are to address significant disparities in housing needs, as well as in their access to these housing opportunities, replacing segregated living patterns with more integrated living patterns, and lastly, fostering and maintaining compliance with both civil rights laws and fair housing laws. Some of the items that we'll need to include in our AFFH assessments are a robust strategy of fair housing outreach and looking into Monte Sereno's enforcement capacity around these issues, analyzing current and future patterns and trends of segregation and integration, researching barriers for accessing opportunities, and trying to mitigate any risk of displacement as we add additional housing units in Monte Sereno. So the regional housing needs allocation, another term that you'll hear us talk about a lot in the housing element process. The acronym you'll see is RHNA, but we also refer to this as RHNA. So that's important to know for future discussions. And what RHNA actually is the number of homes that Monte Sereno will need to plan for between 2023 and 2031. And this is spread out across different income and affordability levels. And this number, RHNA, was assigned to us by the state. And another department or term you'll hear us use is HCD, and that is the State Department of Housing and Community Development. So, but two new acronyms for everybody to learn, RHNA and HCD. And so for Monte Sereno specifically, the RHNA, as you can see at the bottom, is a total of 193 units, and it's spread between different income groups, with the highest percentage in the above moderate income and the second highest percentage in the very low income. And this distribution, as well as the total number, again, was assigned to Monte Sereno by the state HCD. So we want to create a housing element that is inclusive of the housing needs and desires of the Monte Sereno community. And we also want to make sure that it meets all the requirements that HCD has outlined for us for this sixth cycle. And in comparison to previous cycles, the state has enabled the HCD to have a lot stronger of a enforcement arm of their department. And some of the consequences if we are unable to have a certified housing element include limited access to state funding, lawsuits that can originate from both the state, the public, as well as other housing advocate groups. And some consequences could be court mandated compliance, as well as paying for the legal fees of those resulting lawsuits. There's also court imposed fines up to $10,000 a day, and a concept known as receivership, which would mean that Monte Sereno would lose local control on building matters, and the court would be able to have approval over housing developments. So in terms of our general timeline and next steps, the general process that all jurisdictions have to go through include data analysis and looking into the sites inventory, which all of you, the council and the commissioners, will be able to review our initial drafts of later on this spring. And once we get feedback from the public and the decision makers about the sites inventory, as well as creating policies and programs, we will release a public draft of the housing element for everyone to comment on. We'll then incorporate that feedback and send our updated draft of the housing element to the state, and they'll give us feedback. And that will allow us to produce a final draft of our housing element, which will then go to the Site and Architectural Commission for them to recommend to the City Council on reviewing and adopting. And our last step will be submitting to HCD for a certified housing element. And our deadline for all of this is January of 2023, next year.
Yeah. Do you want to take questions now, or do you want to wait till your presentation is over? I saw somebody had their hands up.
Oh, my apologies. I can't see the raised hands at the moment, but Andy, unless you want to do it differently, I was planning on taking questions at the end.
I agree. I think that sounds.
Okay.
All right,
perfect.
let's
We
just,
can always come back to the slides if
Sure.
there's one in particular in question.
all right, let's keep.
Sounds good. We look forward to those questions. That's our most exciting part of the meeting, is hearing from you all. So the specific process for Monte Sereno that we'll be going through, we've been working closely with Diana, and EMC has been working on data analysis of the previous housing element and current data that looks at the future housing needs. We are also in the beginning stages of a robust public engagement plan that I'll go into more detail on. And our next steps will be identifying potential sites, looking at different policies and programs we can implement to accomplish our RENA goals. And then we'll also be releasing chapters of the actual policy document as we draft them for the public to comment on. So it won't, be one large document for the public to review. It'll be kind of spaced out for easier digestion, so to speak, and to be able to more quickly integrate public comment. So we are excited to have that stage in our next steps as well. In a more specific timeline, as I said, we are currently working on analyzing and reviewing data, and we have a workshop coming up, which I'll talk about more later, and working on the sites inventory as well as policy development into the spring. Into the summer, you'll start to see the fully written housing element draft after we compile the public feedback and other decision maker feedback. And then we will submit to the HCD in the fall for review, and probably the summer as well, before we come up with the final housing element draft. And then we will go to public hearings that will involve council to move towards adoption, and then sending it on to HCD. So before we dive into some initial strategies and ideas that we have for sites and programs, I do want to emphasize that these are just what we've heard so far, and it's not a comprehensive look at everything we're thinking about, but we did just want to give everybody a taste and idea of what we've heard so far. And this is where we really welcome any feedback from both the public and decision makers on ways to move forward. So before we get to Monte Sereno specifically, what HCD is looking for in the sites inventory is a specific list of identified sites, including where we're going to accommodate low and very low income additional housing units to meet our RENA categories for those income groups, looking at the capacity of Monte Sereno, as well as non-vacant sites, and making sure that the sites we've outlined are adequate for adding housing. And in terms of using existing sites and making sure that they qualify as being able to be part of the site's inventory, they need to be zoned appropriately, as well as be available for residential use during our planning period. And if there aren't enough existing sites to accommodate the RENA for each income category, Monte Sereno will need to identify additional sites, and we do expect that this will be the case. So some of the strategies that are generally recommended for cities that need to identify additional sites are changing the city's general plan, rezoning, and adopting specific programs and policies. And these strategies are truly necessary in order to show HCD how we are going to meet their requirements and accommodate the full amount of the housing needs within our RENA. So this is a survey response, and a quick introduction before I dive into it is just that, again, this is just a start. Obviously, the 17 responses is not a statistically significant by any means, but we just want to show a flavor of what we're hearing so far. And we know that one thing that is unique to Monte Sereno, and this survey is available on our website, which I'll get to in a moment. So the people that have responded so far, we wanted to ask a question about in-home employees, because we know that a lot of Monte Sereno households employ people in home, whether it's related to landscaping or cleaning or caring for a family member. And so as we move forward, we want to hear from more people, but we assume that it will be along this very preliminary trend line of this potential need for housing for in-home employees that work in Monte Sereno. And one of the primary strategies we are looking at for to accommodate and plan for the 193 housing units is using ADUs, which is accessory dwelling units, or other secondary housing units. So out of our 13 responses so far, you can see that we have some people interested, some that are unsure, and this to us shows that, you know, we still need to make sure we're doing robust public engagement on what an ADU is and the benefits of them. And this includes educating the public as well as hearing from the public, getting feedback from the Monte Sereno residents on some potential barriers that they've encountered as they have tried to add accessory dwelling units or other secondary housing units. And as we hear back and do more data analysis, we can, in our housing element, integrate programs and policies that address certain identified challenges so that we're removing these barriers. And the next steps for sites identifications, we will continue to outreach to property owners that have already indicated they're interested in adding ADUs or other housing units. And then we also recognize that it'll be very important to continue our education on the benefits of adding secondary housing units. As we've heard from community members, we know that there is a desire for either adult children who grew up here and want to continue to be able to live in Monte Sereno, or retired folks who have also lived here for a long time and want to be able to continue to live here, and then also taking into consideration the housing needs of in-home employees as well. So that'll be part of our targeted outreach. And then we're also continuing to do data analysis into existing sites and new potential sites. So now I'm very excited to talk to you about our public engagement process. And here at EMC, we really strive to emphasize and integrate a truly iterative and always pivoting and flowing engagement strategy. It's not only about making sure that the information is out there for the public, it's really making sure that we're reaching the public where they're at and listening to residents, and making sure we understand that feedback, so that it really comes down to being able to make a housing element that is truly inclusive of what we've heard from the community about the housing needs and desires for the future of Monte Sereno. Some of the ways to participate: we have the At Home in Monte Sereno website, which I'll get to in a minute. And also, as I mentioned earlier, continuing to do targeted outreach. We can also reach people through these public meetings like tonight. And we also have a community workshop coming up in April, and I'll get to that in a minute. One of the initial strategies that we implemented was a postcard that was mailed to all Monte Sereno residents in mid-January, and it invites them to go to our website and learn more about the housing element and how they can get involved. And this is a little preview of the website. It is www.athomeinmontesereno.com. This is the homepage, and you can see that at the top we have a few different ways for people to learn more information. We also have the registration tool in the top right, and registering for the site allows people to make sure they're up to date on the latest changes to the website and upcoming events. So we highly recommend registering, and for both the council, commissioners, and the public, we invite you to be ambassadors for this website and share it with your family and friends to make sure that everyone is on in a mutual understanding of this housing element process and how to engage. This is a great start, but certainly we have a lot more in our tool belt, our toolkit for public engagement. This is, if you scroll down on the homepage, you can see these tools. I want to highlight there's the Take the Surveys. There are 2 available, and that is where the results that I shared earlier came from. So we want to see more participation there so that we can really hear from the residents and bring it back to decision makers, what we're hearing. And then the vote for your favorite tool. We know that accessory dwelling units are going to be part of our primary strategy to accommodate our additional housing units. So this tool allows people to look at various styles of ADUs and vote on which styles they'd like to see in Monte Sereno, as well as provide comments. So the upcoming workshop, it is Saturday, April 23rd from 2 to 4 p.m. So make sure to mark your calendars. And we have, we'll have more information on how to join on our website. And what the workshop will focus on will make sure that we introduce the housing element process to the community and make sure we are all on the same page, and help everyone understand the timeline. And this is a fast process, and we want to make sure we bring everyone along with us and explain the timeline. And the workshop will also feature a in-depth question and answer session for us to talk about where this housing will go in Monte Sereno, as well as some initial strategies for programs and policies. And that concludes my presentation. So Andy and I are happy to take questions at this time, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a very complicated subject that you guys are addressing, and you make it sound like it's going to be very streamlined and nothing to worry about. And unfortunately, most of us are going to have many sleepless nights to walk through this. So hopefully you guys will be doing most of the walking or night walking or whatever.
We'll be working very hard. Yes.
Thank you very much, Lauren, for the presentation. Those who have questions, if you could raise your hands, please. And hopefully I'll get all the side speaker. All right. So right now I have a hand from Mayor Pro Tem Makachek, and then Mr. Butcher after that. I hope I didn't announce your name. Go ahead.
Thanks for your presentation. Could you go back to the slide that is right before the survey response with the pie chart on it, please?
Okay, I'm getting there. You said before the pie charts?
Yeah, one more back, I think.
This.
That one.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So the third bullet point, adopting programs and policies. Did I miss the explanation of that one?
Well, right now, it is more general. And this slide was just outlining kind of the overall approach. And so the different programs and policies that Monte Sereno will be looking at, we kind of gave a flavor of that with the discussion about the ADUs and secondary housing units. So that will certainly be part of our programs and policies. But we are always, of course, open to hearing other ideas for programs and policies as well. So it's still very much in the early stages of developing what those will be specifically.
Okay, and sorry, I was smiling when you were talking about RENA and the allocation, because this city council is super familiar with that term and what the numbers are. Could you go to the next slide, please?
Sure.
On this slide, regular employees that work on household maintenance or family care. So a lot of the work I've done, when you're talking about employee effort, you translate it into FTEs, which is a full-time equivalent, versus, someone that comes in and does some household maintenance. They do some yard work. They're, 3 people that come for 2 hours every 2 weeks. So do you is this on an FTE basis, or is this on kind of a binary basis? Like if someone comes and they only work for a couple hours, they're still counted as a regular employee.
Yeah, Andy, I see your hand raised if you'd like to chime in.
Sure, and thank you for this question. It's a great one. And this gives us an opportunity to maybe segue in a little more about why we ask this question. We want to, we have to, according to HCD, we have to understand what the housing needs are for the city of Monte Sereno. And what we know is that there's not a whole lot of people who are in need who are already in Monte Sereno. So as we begin to understand the regional need for future housing in Monte Sereno, we want to respect those who are already maybe part of the daytime residents, the folks who are among the community during the day, and that maybe would have positive impacts on GHG. And in other words, if folks who work within the community were able to live within the community, that would cut down on transit over time. Well, and I also wanted to speak to the question you had about policy, because this relates back to it. So it's very important through HCD's eyes that we have a comprehensive and expansive idea of the needs of the people who would like to live in Monte Sereno. So we'll be getting to policies and programs as we gain a better insight to what the needs are and who it is that would like to be living in Monte Sereno, while we're also learning about who within Monte Sereno would like to create housing. So we'll be connecting the dots.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know if you answered the question about the FTEs or not. I may have missed that. But are you, when you count employees, are you counting full-time employees, or are you just saying, okay, if there's 5 people, 5 gardeners or 5 swimming pool maintenance guys, and you have 5 people who want to live there, but they don't really want to live there because they serve 50 other houses?
Our goal would really be to help encourage folks who are already working in the community to come to our website and share their ideas as well. So whether they work only part-time at multiple places within Monte Sereno, or if there is a full-time employee at a single or maybe a couple of residences, it's more important that they are already part of the community, whether it's part-time or full-time. So I guess my answer is, it doesn't matter whether they're part-time. or
Yeah, and I appreciate that, but I think for our purposes, if we're saying we're trying to provide housing for somebody who's only here 2 hours a day, we need to know whether we're talking about, 5 FTEs or 0.1 FTE. So hopefully you guys can take that into consideration. All right, let me go to Mr. Butchar. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Yeah, Booker.
Booker, sorry about that.
Yeah, so my question really has to do with the site analysis and assessing the current inventory or potential sites. And I want to understand a bit more about that process, who's involved in it, what criteria is being used, that type of thing.
Excuse me. I'd like to answer that question. Thank you for that question. We are using multiple sources for the site analysis. For instance, we want to make sure that we aren't recommending new housing within a very high hazard area. And as you well know, that's almost half of your community. So that's one piece of the puzzle, but there is multiple layers of sources and data that we'll be looking to, and we'll be bringing that forward in the workshop and talking about it thoroughly. But as we well know, there aren't a whole lot of unique sites outside of the opportunity for secondary units within Monte Sereno.
Okay. I guess, yeah, follow-up question to that would be that I noticed on the project chart, there has been some work being done already on that. Is that correct?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Is there any kind of a status on that or update that you can share with the council and the commission? As far as potential sites that have been selected or have been identified?
We do have a couple of sites that are in question and we're pursuing some deeper analysis with that. But if that's something that the council would like to see, our status at this moment, that's certainly something we can provide. We have it in draft form at this point.
Okay.
We welcome your feedback. Absolutely.
That's all I have.
I do see more hands raised. I don't know if it's appropriate for me to call out, but I do see, I don't know if it's Commissioner or Councilmember Allison.
Mayor, you're on mute. Mayor, your microphone's on mute.
Oh, I'm on mute. So yeah, go ahead. Commissioner Ziegler, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. So I'm trying to understand on a project by project basis what this would look like, and probably the hardest category to understand for me would be the very low income. And I wondered if you could walk through some hypothetical numbers of what building a very low income unit would be, whether it's an ADU or on an empty piece of land.
That's a great question. We are pursuing that. So it is a particular challenge in Monte Sereno, because it's not as though there are numerous lots in which we can contemplate a building capable of certainly not capable of meeting the entire arena with a single building. So there are a number of things that HCD wants us to take into consideration, and that includes initially the size. So we would be wanting to look at a site that is between a ½ acre and 10 acres, and there are multiple other considerations within the HCD memo that we would apply to any site that we would consider capable of supporting very low income. In reality, most very low income sites would need some kind of grant, some kind of support it's difficult for a developer to have that pencil with a development. So there are, this comes back to the policy opportunities. So we are thoroughly examining all ways that Monte Sereno might be able to attract grants for construction of very low income housing. And we'll be bringing that forward as we go through the process.
So who would apply for the grant? Would it be the city or the developer?
Well, it would be, it could be either. There are programs that enable either pathway forward.
Can I ask one more question? It's all related.
Of course,
But
of course.
Are you aware of any low-income housing that has been built in communities similar to ours with the benefit of those grants, just so we can understand what that looks like?
I will certainly research that. I'm a big believer in seeing examples so that
Yeah.
we can envision something like that. So we'll be bringing that to our workshop. I think that's a
Thank
great
you.
idea. Thank you for that.
Great questions. Thank you. Just to follow up on that, how do you define a very low income criteria? Is that based on the rent a person can get from a piece of property, or what the property would sell for? Is there a dollar number that we can fit on that? Okay, this would be, if the ADU is built and it collects $1,000 in rent, they'll be considered very low income. But if it collects $4,000 in rent, it's not.
That's generally true. As far as it's helpful if it's deed restricted, and that is something that is often tied with grants. And as you can see here, there's a statement that says for very low income, it would be in support of those who are making less than 50% of AMI. And that is according to the county. So we can certainly include that information with our workshop and with our materials on our website.
That would be great. Do you know what that number is at this
I don't
point?
know the number off the top of my head, but we can make sure to include the chart.
All right, that'd be great. Thank you. Councilmember Turner, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to look again at this very low income and low income in terms of density. Now, I know other cities, Saratoga, Cupertino, Palo Alto, when they talk about very low income and low income, they're looking at a density of 30 units and in an acre for very low income and 20 units for low income. So does that apply to Monte Sereno as well? So they're looking at, for example, one bedroom of 30 units, and that will satisfy their very low income. In our case, it would be 50 units in an acre and a half, for example, of very low income. Is that what we're looking at here?
Thank you for that question. It sounds like you've been paying attention to what your neighbors are pursuing.
Oh, yes,
And
absolutely.
yes, yes. And it's true that HCD recognizes a certain density number as a proxy for affordability. And in Santa Clara County, it's not yet absolutely official, but we've been encouraged through guidance from our Santa Clara Collaborative to assume that that number has just changed from 20 units per acre to 30 units per acre, and it has to do with the overall population of the county. So it is true that in Santa Clara County, it is most likely going to become adopted as official, but right now we're using that guidance of 30 dwelling units per acre as a proxy for affordability.
Okay, may I ask another question, please? You talked earlier about additional sites, right? You said we need additional sites in the end. Based on the conversations that I've heard from other cities, some of them have put in an additional buffer of 30%. And it looks like the ideal buffer for our city would be 10%. So I just wanted to bring that up to just make us aware that if we're going to look at additional sites, that we keep our buffers pretty low.
Yes, I understand that perspective. And when I first entered into this research about Cycle 6 housing element update, I was in that in that team. But what I've come to understand, and we can make this more available, all of the information, more of it. It's sort of a nuanced part of the housing element, but having a buffer enables additional capacity, and that ends up being a city's best friend when we come to the mid-cycle step in the full 8-year cycle of the housing element. And that's because if you've not met your number, or if you've not met the category number, so that if maybe a development has occurred on a site that you anticipated, where you anticipated more affordable units than what ends up being built, then there would be an adjustment. So if you have that buffer, then that decreases the possibility that you would have to do a mid-cycle adjustment, which is nearly akin to doing this whole process over again. So we want to set your city up for success through this 8-year cycle. We don't know yet if that means a 10% buffer or a 30% buffer. But we like to initiate this process by saying everything's on the table until it's not. So we'll bring the sites and the policies and the possibilities forward that would enable even more than a 30% buffer, so that way, if there are some hard no's about sites, then there's room to say no. We want you to be able to say no to some ideas, so that we can, in the end, say yes to enough to satisfy HCD.
Well, let me just say this. If you make our buffer 30%, then the overcapacity then becomes overlay for the next RENA cycle, and we really don't want that. So we need to come up with a buffer that makes sense for Monte Sereno, and not too much of a large buffer.
Thank you, Councilmember Turner. We'll keep that in mind, absolutely.
Was there anything else, Councilmember Turner?
That's it, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sharma, please go ahead.
Thank you. And a couple of my questions were already answered. So the one that I'll still ask, though, is earlier, I think Ms. Lauren referred to a timeline of January 2023. So I wanted to understand, what exactly do we need to get done by that timeline?
At that time, we need to have a full draft adopted by council and have it be in HCD's hands if we are to have this be certified on time. The new law that came into effect just this last September is that there will also be a 30-day requirement prior to a 90-day review by HCD. And it would be in our best interest to aim for the summer, so that there's enough time to then accommodate for any revisions that are requested by HCD. And what we've learned from Southern California cities, those lists are long, and they are, I think it's 70% of those revision requests are affiliated with AFFH. So as your consultants, it's in our best interest and in your best interest that we understand the housing need for the region, so that our meaningful actions, which is the programs and policies, can most directly relate to the understood need. We're trying to get ahead of what we see that HCD is most often requesting revisions around.
So then in the breakdown that you had, with low income housing, very low, do we need to have like sites identified and a plan ready, or is that part of the draft then?
This is going to be much faster than that, because we know that HCD needs a full 90-day review of a draft, and that we are aiming for this summer. So at some point this summer, we would like to hand off to HCD a draft that is not yet adopted by council, but at least there is a nod that this going in this direction is acceptable. That's our goal.
Okay, thank you.
And prior to that draft, I mean, you mentioned that some zoning laws may have to be changed and some other things may have to be done. Does all that have to take place before you submit the draft, or that can be just part of the proposal that we submit?
When we submit it as a draft for the summer, we certainly don't have to have all of our zoning in place, but at least some ideas of what kinds of actions are being contemplated.
Also
And-
keep in mind, summer, July, council is not in session. I don't know if SNA is in session, so you probably want to shoot for June for us to take a look at what you're going to present. All right, thank you. Councilmember Little, please go ahead.
Thank you. A couple of questions. I think I heard earlier on when we were talking, when you were presenting about the AMI as it goes to the affordability, that it is countywide, not Monte Sereno specific. Is that in fact the case?
That's correct.
Okay. So yeah, so I guess we should be able to identify that number and take a look at it. And then I believe in the past that has associated with the incomes of the people occupying in terms of our reporting our successes. And so our ADUs have often had seniors or college students who were renting at decreased rent, who had very limited incomes of their own, fixed income. And we actually beat our very low income numbers before. I guess I just put out there that we should probably expect that a lot of the patterns we've established in the past can continue to work in terms of ADUs and the people who are occupying them. And I think staff has a fair amount of information on that they'll be sharing. So that's one item. The other question, of course, nobody's brought it up yet, but I think this may be a very large elephant in the room. And that is, how does SB 9 relate to all of this? Because if I read this right, we have maybe 1,200 properties in Monte Sereno. Something like 35 or 40% of them are probably qualified for SB 9, maybe more. So it looks like we've already hit all of our zoning numbers for everything because we've already added 400 units to our zoned inventory available via SB 9. Tell me where I'm wrong or how we can take advantage of this for much, if not all of our needs for this round.
We will be receiving HCD guidance within the week is what we're told. So we are anxiously anticipating that before we can solidly rely on it. But you're right, that is likely going to be a huge factor in this. And it will also be helpful for us to understand through our website and people doing surveys, whether or not there are barriers for people who are contemplating moving forward with an SB 9 project. Because if HCD guidance still leaves us with a shortfall, then that would be an example of an opportunity for a policy or program to address any barriers that particularly if there's a single barrier that multiple people cite.
Thank you. I guess I would look forward to having you distribute to the people who would distribute to all of us participating here as soon as possible any information that you get on that.
We absolutely will. Yes.
Yeah, that is really critical. I mean, I've attended some programs. I think probably most of us have, where this subject has come up and HCD is trying to figure out what to do because effectively we don't need to do anything. I mean, the 1,200 or so lots that we have. There are now 2,400 lots, and every lot that we now has 4 units, and we've already passed an ordinance allowing people to build up to 800 square foot on each of those 2 of those units. So rather than keeping that as a backup, see if you can put it in the front. I don't know what HCD says, and I don't know if we need to agree with whatever HCD says. That's why what Councilmember Luthol has pointed out is important that you send it to us so we can run it through our city council to see if that's something we need to look at. But really that's a whole new approach. And rather than trying to satisfy the HCD requirement of the 193 units, probably look at the SB 9 up front and see if you can satisfy the requirement based on that, because we'll still have to pigeonhole the very low income and the other low income into those SB 9 numbers. And maybe we'll need to adjust our own zoning allotment that we've done. But I would recommend that you guys take a look at it. It's a new approach probably not considered when you're doing these plannings before, but I think that should be front and center rather than as a back end that may be available. All right, that's my comment, I guess. And Councilmember Lawler, please go ahead. Councilmember Lawler, did you have your hand up, or I guess I don't see it up anymore?
Sorry, I did. Yes, I was on mute. Given that the elderly, we have, a growing elderly population of residents maybe on fixed incomes that may have full-time live-in care. Obviously, facilitating housing for these people is important. Would home sharing, if they're living in, would the HCD over time consider home sharing, someone who's living in full-time, would that be considered very low income or extremely low income?
I think that's a fantastic idea and a great example of a program or policy. I know that there's organizations, I think Covia is one of them, where there's some assistance in increasing those kinds of opportunities. So we will pursue that and discover how that is or is not counted specifically.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Commissioner Zeidler, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm kind of new to this, and I was just wondering about the mechanics of how you identify sites without knowing whether the property owners are interested in building an ADU or redeveloping.
That's a great question, and we do have a tool for that. We have a property owner interest form. And if we don't have that connected with our website just now, I think we're just in the process of that. So it's certainly helpful for us to understand whether or not a property owner is interested, particularly in these secondary units, whether they be ADUs or SP9s. Excuse me.
And
So
SP9.
pretty important. And if people indicate that they're interested in building an ADU, that takes a step toward meeting the requirement, that interest alone.
If we're able to express to HCD that there is a, excuse me, a broader interest in something like this than maybe even what guidance they're giving us. For instance, there is a mathematical formula for being able to use ADUs in this 8-year cycle. So if there's a similar kind of formula for SB9s, but at the same time, if we're able to demonstrate that there's even more interest than those formulas that they support and give guidance with, then I think that can go a long way.
And I just wanted to add that the form for property owner interest is live on our website. So if you know someone that is interested, you can point them to our website and fill that out.
Thank you for that confirmation, Lauren. I really appreciate it.
Was there anything else, Commissioner Zeider? All right, Chair White, if you could go ahead.
Sorry. Hey, Mayor. Thank you. This is really a follow-up to your question. So in relationship to modifying the general plan to affect zoning, and this may be a question for Sergio, I don't know, but maybe Ande or Lauren will know the answer. Can you describe for us briefly what that process involves and whether members of the public have a participation in that process or whether that's strictly a city council effort?
So short answer, yes, there's certainly going to be opportunity for the public to participate in any amendment of the general plan. Now, the housing element is, of course, a part of the city's general plan. There are, prior publication requirements and several public notice, requirements as well. Additionally, the housing element is going to be coming to both the the Site and Architecture Commission, as well as the City Council prior to approval. So the process is prescribed by state law. There will be multiple meetings about it. So I expect that there will be plenty of opportunity for the public to comment about how they feel about it.
And just in terms of timeline, assuming we identify something that we want to change zoning with respect to, what is the time frame to accomplish that?
Well, and changing zoning is different than changing your, general plan or housing element. So typically, you will change your, housing element, any sort of density requirements that are mentioned specifically in your general plan, because your zoning has to be in conformity with whatever's in your general plan. But once your general plan has changed, then you can go and, change your zoning by ordinance, which is the same process as making any sort of, amendment to development standards.
Okay, so in other words, we're talking about 60 to 90 days, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sergio.
If I may, I can also speak to the HCD requirements around any rezoning that is used within the housing element as part of our tool forward. And would you care for me to?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So for a housing element that is certified on time, there would be a 3-year period of time in which you can do that rezoning. And for many reasons, for mostly AFFH reasons, the Southern California cities are not being able to certify on time. And if that were to be the case for us, we would only have a 1-year period of time in which to rezone according to their schedule.
What that means, they can't certify on time. They have 1 year, which starts when they come up with something that gets certified, because I assume they have to go back and to the drawing board and send something else that might get certified. And that might take another 6 months or a year to get certified. So I guess the timeline starts from some point. I'm not sure where it would start from. All right.
If I may, we did get that answer from HCD, and it would the 1 year period of time for Monte Sereno, because it's in the Bay Area, it would be January of 2023. So for that reason, we would recommend carrying forward along with the housing element, if at all possible, ordinances if any rezoning were to be recommended.
All right, well, that's really great input. So I think we should definitely keep that in mind, because you can't assume that your housing plan is going to be certified. So presume it isn't going to be, and then so the time period starts from January 1, not from when it finally gets certified. Okay, great. Thank you for that answer. Any other questions? If not, are there any questions or comments on I guess I'll go to the public now. It's for any questions that we have that the public may have. If you would raise your hand, then we can call upon you. I saw one question posted in the chat. I don't know if from former Mayor Lon Allen, asking whether the April 23rd workshop can be in person rather than online. Can we do that on person? I guess it would depend a lot on what the city council has and what the governor does or the county does. But I think that's a great idea to have it in person. Are there any other hands raised in the public so we can answer any other questions citizens may have?
Mayor, I believe Lon Allen is asking to speak.
Yeah, please go ahead. You're on mute, Mr.
Okay,
Allen.
do you hear me now?
Yes, please go ahead.
What I haven't heard in the last hour or so, the housing needs are statewide, and there are certain areas where it's safer to have higher density housing than others. In the last few years, we're all very much aware of the fire danger in California. April, Mary and I will have lived in Monte Sereno for 43 years, and we only have two major thoroughfares. We have State Highway 9 and we have Winchester Avenue. State Highway 9, of course, has a median with eucalyptus trees, which are very, very flammable. And if there were a fire that would hit this area, if any of those trees went down, State Highway 9 would not be accessible. So as was mentioned earlier, we only have 1,245 housing units right now in Monte Sereno. If we increased it by 193, 16%, that's more cars trying to get out unlimited access if we have a fire. And from what we've seen, I think we could predict we're going to have more fires in future years. And I haven't heard anything that says that in coming up with these RENA numbers, that looking at a particular locale, in our case, our 1.6 square miles, where safety is taken into consideration in deciding how much more density we could have in terms of automobile traffic if there was a fire or an earthquake, where people would have to leave the area. And I guess I would ask our consultants at EMC if you could please address that.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a very important question. Please go ahead and respond, Mr. Flower. Or,
We will be, we are required to make sure that there's consistency with the safety element of the general plan, along with our housing element. So we do have staff that will be looking at evacuation patterns as part of the CEQA analysis. So we'll we definitely take this into consideration, safety concerns into consideration when selecting potential housing sites and when considering programs and policies. I understand the concern, absolutely.
okay. Was there any other questions from the public? All right, I'll bring this back to our Council and Site and Architecture Commission. Councilmember Leopold, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to respond to former Mayor Allen's question a little more in depth, and that is when the RENA number allocation was being discussed, we as a city council took action. I appeared and appealed our numbers, and we were told, tough luck, we don't care whatsoever. Word from on high is that fire danger and so forth are no excuse at all, other than in the specific high fire districts as already delineated, and take it up with your representatives in Sacramento, we don't care. So very frustrating, and it's really not bringing us anywhere to complain about that. There's no further route forward. We have to deal with the 193 number as I understand it. And then we've got to worry about siting within our city, within the challenges we have. So we'll keep this discussion going and appreciate your input. Thanks.
And I had Councilmember Little did a great job arguing that, but I think 25 or 26 cities appealed the decision in Northern California. Only one appeal was granted, and it was based on some typographical error of some sort, not on any consideration on what the cities were having to go through. So I've heard that there's at least one city in Southern California that said, the heck with it, we're not going to do this anyway. And so they're not even bothering to submit an HCD thing. So that, who knows, maybe that may be our decision also. But at this point, we do expect and hope the EMC will do a great job in giving us something that all the citizens of Monte Sereno will be happy about and will all party. Any other? Or if anybody has any final comments, discussions, or thoughts. Okay, I just had a few other things. If you don't mind, I'll go through those. We may have already touched some of those. But let me. I think you've probably answered most of the questions, and you are doing a workshop on April 23rd. Do you anticipate when you do the workshop, you'd have something concrete to present? I mean, I think you've done a great job of giving us the overall bird's view, and I guess, and I liked your Monte Sereno bird slide that you presented. So you've given us a great overall bird view, but is there going to be something specific that you give us and say, okay, we've identified these plots as potential, and this is more what we need to do, and I know that you guys don't like it, but this is where we're at? Or is it going to be more of a generic discussion?
We like to approach communities with options and alternatives, and for the workshops to be discussions about pros and cons of each. So I anticipate that we'll be bringing forward some opportunities for people to give feedback to help give us more guidance.
All right, but you're going to give them some specific proposals saying, okay, this, you got this choice or that choice. I assume that's the way you're going, or you're still going to be looking for input?
That's our goal, but we would encourage input at this point to give us guidance even now for thinking about what alternatives you might like to see.
Yeah, no, I understand, but you've given yourself a very short period of time. I mean, April 23rd is only a month and a half away. And I don't know if that gives you enough time to give us enough information so we can say, hey, no, this is not going to work, or you should go this way. Other than if it's going to be more like, okay, community, do you want an ADU in your backyard or not? So I don't know where you're going to be, but I think what we're looking for is something really specific, in whether we like it or not, and then we can discuss that. But I don't know if you've given yourself enough time to put that together.
We're working towards that. I think it's going to fall somewhere between when you say specific, I guess I just want to be clear, you don't mean a full alternative housing element document, one and another, but what I hear is alternatives and options for how we might go forward. We'll be looking at a couple of individual sites and contemplating what kind of appetite the community might have for any changes that might occur on those sites. It is very few sites in Monte Sereno. I could imagine also thinking about SB 9 and ways in which we may be able to open up opportunities for SB 9 to occur more readily. And that may be also true for ADUs. So we welcome from the public any ideas going forward on all of that. We'll be bringing forward a few ideas, but we love it when those ideas come from the community itself, either the public or decision makers.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that, and you really have your work cut out. But you know, the community is not going to react till you probably put something in front of them and they say we don't like it. The comments before that, you may not get many, so you're really putting yourself in the position of presenting something to the community that they'll come back and say, no, we don't really like this, and then you've got to fall back on something else. So look forward to getting your input, because after April 23rd, you want to present it in the summer, which gives you May or June to finalize it and finish it up and present it to council, and hopefully with the Site and Architecture Commission's input also, that'll be required. So look forward to getting that. And Councilmember Luto, please go ahead.
Yeah, I want to comment about that same issue, and former Mayor Allen brought it up as well. And based on experience that many of us have had with the prior housing element, I really want to underline, I mean, we as the city officials try to engage the community and come up with great ideas, and staff works really hard, and nobody pays any attention whatsoever until we go and zone right next door to them, myself included, and historically. And then everybody gets really worked up, and there are petitions, and people throw around the word recall, and all of these things happen. And so I guess I'm kind of reaching out to EMC with your experience on this, and pointing out, as we're here in the middle of COVID, and we have, if we're lucky, half a dozen participants, even though Zoom has made it 1,000 times easier to participate. And places like San Jose are getting great participation, more than ever before. We're not getting that here. Our citizens are busy. They kind of wave at their neighbors, and then they go tuck their kids in and do their lives and go on their way. And until something directly affects them, we have a hard time getting that participation. So where I'm kind of going with this is, I mean, we need your help. We need your help in the COVID world. Former Mayor Allen brought it up. Maybe we can do this in person. That does help somewhat, maybe, although it's been a long time since anyone's gotten together, and people may not want to do that. So I'm thinking, and this is for our staff as well as they work with EMC, and it's my own suggestion, we may need to scare people. We may need to send out a very severe flyer to people, a little bit on the over the top side that says, coming next door to you, if you don't speak up now, 4 units up to 5 stories along the major corridors. We're going to have to get people's attention if we want this up front, because otherwise all we're going to get is grief on this after the fact. And we're going to say, well, look at the recordings. Look how hard we worked. Look how many times we asked for your input and didn't get it. And nobody cares. So we really need the outreach. And it sounds like we really need to do something dramatic before the April meeting to get that input at the April meeting, because otherwise it's going to mess up the timelines. So that's my thoughts. I don't have solutions though.
Thank you. Those are good comments. Commissioner Zeidler, please go ahead.
I completely agree with Councilmember Lutold, and I've noticed maybe some of you have that banner when you go through Saratoga and you're going to get on 85 from Saratoga Avenue. I think it says 1,700 homes coming to Saratoga, decide where to put them. And then it invites people to attend the meeting or something like that. I think we should do the same. We can even call Saratoga and see where they got their banner.
Yeah, Saratoga's had midnight meetings up to 2 a.m. Trying to resolve their housing element. So they're already having a blast over there. Councilmember Lawler, Commissioner Zeidler, did you have anything else?
No.
Okay, Councilmember Lawler, please go ahead.
Thank you. I was going to suggest that Councilmember Luthvold can take a page out of Councilmember Rishi Kumar's book, and he does a lot of very regular email blasts that are very detailed and keep the people in the loop. I also wanted to mention, in terms of the process, to Andy, that I'd really like to see a consideration into incentivizing ADUs. How can we creatively incentivize people to build ADUs that make sense for our city? And that is it. Thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions? Commissioner Sharma, please go ahead.
No questions. I was just going to agree with the Councilmember Lawler's comment about how do we incentivize homeowners to build ADUs. I think that might be the best path forward for our city.
All right. So it sounds like that's something the EM should consider as it's put a plan together as to what the city needs to do. Because I guess what we're all trying to say is by April 23rd, we want you to be as close as to the final thing you can submit. And I know that doesn't give you much time and probably you don't have much input, but do the best you can. And if you need to have another discussion with City Council or the site and architecture, we could schedule another meeting, either together or separately, to give you further input. But you probably want to get as close as possible to that. Did you have any response to that, Mr. Flower?
I'm sorry, respond to the idea of increasing the outreach and trying to stir up attention. We have heard about that banner. It's becoming a legacy, and we're more than happy to work with staff to help make that come true for Monte Sereno. We'd love to get people engaged and involved, and we could even we could maybe even come up with some graphics that get people's attention, help people understand what the work at hand is right now.
So, sounds good. Yeah, it's going to be thinking out of the box a little bit. Councilmember Luthor, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. One more comment I wanted to make. I'm not sure, my screen's limited on how many people I'm seeing. I hadn't heard from Councilmember Turner in a while. I know she's very involved, has a lot of history with Monte Sereno, has been very involved with the issues around SB 9 and all of this. And also she offered some insight a while back about at least one city that had really pushed their survey, I think, and really got people to sign on their survey saying, yeah, we'll consider a lot split. And apparently the city had more than enough people sign on their survey saying we're seriously considering splitting our lots, and that they were making that the heart of their plan, if not their entire plan. So I don't know if Ms. Turner has some input for us tonight or input she can share with EMC to really help, but I know she's got a lot of valuable insight for us. So that's my comment. Thanks.
Let me have a call upon Councilmember Turner so she can respond to Councilmember Luttrell, then I'll call on Commissioner Zeitler.
Yes, so the city of Escalon has 1,300 homes, pretty much like Monte Sereno. And the way they're probably the only city in Southern California, as well as in Northern California, that have finished their housing element. And the way they did it is they went to each citizen and asked each citizen interested in doing SB 9 or a lot split or building ADUs to write a letter to HCD agreeing to that. HCD accepted all their letters and they were basically done. The other cities, as you know, they were still all struggling. It can become very contentious, just like Cupertino and Saratoga. Probably the most contentious is Saratoga. And I think one of the things we need to look at is to distribute the sites within the city and not just at the perimeter, for example, or not just in one location, because this became a real bone of contention. There is only one city that said we will not participate in with the RHNA numbers, and that's Manhattan Beach. And so they're in litigation with HCD. There was a state initiative that some of the mayors in Los Angeles started. However, we needed 1.5 million signatures to overturn local control, and thus we could overturn SB 9 and SB 10. However, when we looked and we analyzed where we were, we only had 50,000 signatures and we needed 1.3 million signatures. So we postponed the state initiative. We're trying to look at seeing whether they can actually get more funding so that we can hire people to go out and get more signatures. But that's where we stand at this point in time. We weren't successful in making the 2022 November ballot, but maybe the 2024 November ballot. So those are my inputs.
Thank you for that, and thank you for all the work you've done on that, Councilmember Turner. That was a great initiative, but I suspect it's going to be hard to push that further. Maybe it can be pushed. It needs a lot of funding, and it looks like, at least on the other side, I was at a mayor election candidate forum, and I specifically asked the question as to whether those candidates, they're running for San Jose City Mayor, whether they would be supporting that initiative. But at that time, the initiative was already dead. But in any case, their position was no, they're more in support of SB 9 than not. And I think that's generally the Democratic Party is more in that. And I'm not saying that's the wrong thing for the Democratic Party to do or the right thing to do, but given that kind of opposition and the labor opposition, it's going to be a tough one. So I suspect we're going to see more state takeover of our city councils. And so we need our own city people to run for assembly so they can understand what's going on. Hopefully we'll have somebody doing that. Commissioner Zeitler, thank you for waiting. Please go ahead.
Sure, thank you. In terms of encouraging our homeowners to build ADUs, I just wondered what those options might be, because I assume we can't give any sort of rebate or financial incentive. And I'm trying to brainstorm, but it's hard for me to figure out what types of incentives we would give. Does anyone have any examples?
Does anybody want to respond to that? Please go ahead. Yeah, Councilmember Lawler, please go ahead.
Well, one of the examples would be obviously the barriers or the cost, right? And the time that it takes to build them. So obviously, I guess the most obvious would be a break on permitting fees, right? So how can we look at everything that happens with building an ADU and how can we ease that for them and make it an easier process? So we've got to think outside the box.
Yeah, and I don't know if actually subsidizing and paying developers to do that is illegal for a city to do. Maybe Attorney Rudin can help us with that.
It would likely have some problems, and I will just leave it at that.
All right, thank you.
Then we'll have to find other ways.
And typically the way that this is considered is by lowering regulatory barriers, such as, making less onerous architectural requirements, for example, streamlining the permit approval process. Those are the type of barrier removals that are typically considered by jurisdictions, rather than specific financial contributions of public money.
Thank you. I didn't think that we could. I was just giving that as an example of what I figured we couldn't do. But thank you for those concrete examples.
I guess there's a breakdown in mortgage interest rates that has been done for teachers and other individuals in San Jose. Is there a different format for being able to subsidize mortgage loans or give them out or reduce interest rates for some reason?
And I will revise my comment to say, at least with respect to market rate housing, that is a concern, the use of public money. There have been court cases out there that say that, public subsidies of, affordable housing are likely to, pass muster under when considered against the constitutional prohibition on gift of public funds. So typically the courts have said, well, subsidizing affordable housing is a legitimate public purpose for which public money can be used, but there are still restrictions on that as well.
Oh, okay.
So if it's deed restricted and it will be used for affordable housing, typically you can put some public money towards that.
All right. So sounds like there may be something to consider there. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. Anything else, Commissioner Zeitler? No. Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Makachek, please go ahead.
Hi. I just wanted to make 3 quick comments. My first one is I don't believe that there's any new houses or complete remodels that are going in that don't have an ADU as part of them. That's one, and we can probably have our city planner speak to us at the next meeting on that. And then to Council Member Leuthold's point, and I think the Site and Architectural Commissioners will agree that if you really want to get people to notice something in Monte Sereno, just put up some story poles, because that usually gets people going. And then my final comment is to EMC. It looks like a quail has been kind of moving up the left-hand side of your slides. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but that's well done. Thank you.
Any other comments? I think we've had a great meeting. Everybody has had some great inputs. Have we given you enough information on this, Mr. Flower and Ms. Hoare?
It's been a lot of great feedback. Definitely. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for your contributions.
Thank you. Do you have any final comments you want to leave us with?
We look forward to bringing you options and hearing back from you about your preferences around that.
All right, and we look forward to getting some really specific options that make us all cry, but we'll see. All right, if there's nothing else, I guess we can go towards adjourning the meeting. Oh, City Manager Leonardis, I'm not sure if you had a chance to, if you had any comments, or if you want to, please go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mayor, and listen to the whole conversation. Very good. Lots of feedback, lots of input. Looking forward to the public's input at the workshop and going forward. And we're glad to be working with EMC. They're doing a great job so far. Great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right. And if nobody else has any comments, I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. It's great to work with the Site and Architecture Commission. You guys have been doing a great job. Keep it up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Take care. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.